What's going on, you guys? So, as you can see, finally got some roll cage material. So, time to get started on doing some tube chassis work. Now, before we get started, I should clarify what I mean by tube chassis work. I don't mean building an actual tube chassis. I mean using tubes to do work on the chassis. For example, cage, crash bar, stuff like that. So not actually building a tube chassis per se, but tubes, chassis, me doing work. Okay, so I think what we're gonna do today is build the main hoop for the cage. So I don't think we're gonna walk through step by step on the whole thing because it is pretty time consuming and I don't want it to take 4 times longer than it needs to. So I think what I'm gonna do is just set up the camera, maybe stop here and there while I'm doing stuff, explain to you guys what I'm doing. But first of all, we need to get the dimensions all drawn up and get kind of an outline of the cage and like the main hoop that we're gonna do. Now, to do that, first I needed to get measurements. So I had to get measurements between the base plates here and the base plate over there. And we're not taking centerline dimensions, we're taking outside, so as far out as the edge of the tube is going to go. So on this side it is 56.5. Our second bend is 55 inches away from the other side there. This is 17.25 from here to here. Our roof bar, 36 inches between the bends. And it is, I wrote it somewhere up here, there we go, 32.5 inches tall. And that height is from the base plate here at the lowest point to the highest point. So we have all those points. Now what I'm gonna do is go draw all that up on the ground. That way I can get a better idea of the outside dimensions and make it really easy to test the bar as I'm bending it. So I can just kind of lay the bar over the lines, kind of make sure everything is falling within the area it needs to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw that up right now. All right, so here is our kind of outside cage dimension here. I have all my numbers and everything all drawn up. We got the angle ideas of what we need to do. So now what I'm gonna do is cut a piece of material. Basically the way I do it is I go width times height. And when you have that loss of material through your bends and stuff like that, usually doubling your height will give you more than enough material. You can just lob off the legs when you're done. So I'm gonna get tube cut and dig out my tube bender and start swinging some tube. All right, quick intermission to give you guys a little bit of an explanation as to how I'm bending these. So as you can see here, from the outline that I drew, the outer, parameters of the cage, we're following along the line pretty closely. I did overbend this one by like a degree, but I did it on both sides, so that's not an issue. But the way I found these lines of where to bend them, so I accidentally rubbed my center line off here, but I had a center mark here, line that up with my line I drew on the ground. And then this is a test piece. So I have a spot on my die that I marked to line the lines up with from where I'm gonna start my bends. And to figure out this bend, when this was laying straight, what I did was overlaid this on here until it just touched the outside of that line and then transferred that line onto here. And that's where I knew where to start pulling the bar from right there. So an example of that On this one, now I need to make sure it follows the outline to there. So I'm going to take this bar, slide it down until I get it to line up right where I want it. Then take that line, mark it on the bar right there, and then set that up and line that up with where I've been lining those marks up on my dies. Make sure you consistently line them up on the same spot on your die, otherwise your bends will be off. But I'm gonna line that up in the die and then pull it through. But that's just a rough idea of how I've been marking out my bends and figuring out where to put my bends at. Anyways, we got 2 more bends to put in it, so let's get back to it. Okay, well, the main part of the bar is done. It's in the car. I don't know if you can see it. So here's our main hoop. Had to make sure to leave some room here so we can get in there to weld it. This will need to get cut at a little bit of an angle so it sits flat, because we don't want any gaps or anything like that. We have a decent amount of clearance here, a little more than I would have liked, but it's doable with some gusset plates and stuff. Roof clearance is super tight, so we're definitely good on that. Probably could have brought this bend out a little bit further, but overall I'm satisfied with it, and I think it will work just fine. Alright, the next bar that we need to do on that is going to be the diagonal crossbar that'll go that way, going from one corner to the other, and then we need to put the harness bars in. So yeah, let's get back to it, start cutting some tube down, measuring, notching, all that. Okay, so we have our crossbar notched out and cut to length. Luckily it was first try, so honestly a lot of that was just eyeballing, but that's how a lot of this stuff actually is for me. I just kind of eyeball it. So that is going to be our diagonal crossbar, and when it is up there, kind of hard for me to hold it in place, but so we don't have any gaps. Same thing over here, no major gaps. I do leave a little bit of material. I don't like bringing this all the way down to the bottom because I do need to shape this, and I'm gonna want to be able to weld down here too and get around all this. But now the next step is I actually need to go ahead and tack that bar on there, so I got to get it cleaned up, tack it in place, that way we can build the harness crossbar for it. Alright, so I have the bar here on the bench, getting ready to weld this up right now, or at least tack it in place. One thing I do want to point out that you should do when you're TIG welding a cage like this is make sure you have a purge hole in the tube somewhere, that way vapor can escape, because when you're TIG welding tubing like this, if you seal it off when you get to the end of that weld, as you're heating that up, you have gases and stuff like that expanding inside the tube. They don't have anywhere to go, and they'll blow your weld out, and it'll make a really, really shitty end of your weld. It can be very difficult to finish it. So what I do, since this tube is still open right now, I go ahead and mark off where the tube is going to meet on here, and then just drill a small hole right there, which will get covered up by this tube. That way when you're welding it, as all these gases are expanding, it has a spot to go out of the tube without building pressure up inside of here. And then you don't have to worry about blowing out a weld or anything like that. Now, sometimes when you're doing some tubes, like when I go to weld this down onto the base plates, I am gonna have to drill a small tiny hole in it somewhere to purge out the gases or whatever. But usually when you're doing bars to another tube, always make sure and see if you can actually drill a hole underneath where this is gonna cover it up and have a route to have the gases escape. So just a little tip in there. Alright, so now our crossbar is welded on to the main hoop. So what we need to do next is go ahead, get this set back up in the car, and then we need to measure out where our harness bar is going to go and how much clearance we're going to have for it. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and do that, throw it in there, measure it up, and then we'll get back to cutting tube and notching. Okay, after hours of cutting, bending, notching, welding, main hoop is done. Cross beam, harness bar, all that stuff's welded on. Good to go. So the next step that we're not going to be doing today is we got to kind of notch out the bottoms a little bit, get it a little more level in the car. And then once it's level in there, we're going to go ahead, tack it to the base plates, and then start on the front bars. But for now, that's going to be it for this one. So like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel if you're new, follow the build along, and until the next one, I'll catch you guys later.